Hi, welcome to Chapter 2. When we left Claire in the last chapter, she had a big decision to make. She can either get on the ship and sail across to the Caribbean to meet her father, or she could turn around and try to make her own way in the world. There's big risks for her either way, but having a father's protection is something she both needs and wants. So let's see how she gets on. Chapter 2. Clara spent 3 weeks on a ship called Lady Anne, feeling uncertain about what to do, intermittently kicking herself for being so stupid as to impulsively follow a strange man onto a ship leaving England. But her curiosity and sense of adventure overtook her as the weather grew warmer. The convent was never warm, and she had trouble believing how warm the days were getting as they traveled southward. What would the sisters say if they knew she was the daughter of a pirate? They may even have known. Not that Clara really understood what that meant. Pirates were awful people who raided and stole, the curse sailing the Caribbean waters, and one of them was her father. For the umpteenth time, she wondered what he wanted with her, why he'd sent to retrieve her now. But the ever-present curiosity kept bouncing around questions in her head, which none of the men on the ship answered. So she'd stopped asking somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. Now they had to be getting close as they were sailing past lush green islands with beaches so white they blinded in the bright sunlight. Strips of turquoise water surrounded each island, luminous like a band of jewels. Very little color had existed in Clara's life, but here there was an explosion of it like she'd never seen. The birds were bright, the sun was brighter, the sea sparkled, and the islands were covered in deep green jungle. "Are we far away?" she asked the stringy-haired man. Again he ignored her, and anger flared in her chest, but years of discipline had taught her to control it, hiding it away to pretend to be the demure female she was supposed to be, never question, never criticize, never have an opinion in any shape or form. Walking up on the quarter-deck, she slipped her legs through the bars of the stern balustrade and watched the foamy wake of the ship, and the singing sound the water made around the hull. Wooden ropes creaked and groaned with the pressure of the wind and the water. Sitting like this, she'd seen whales and dolphins, but none of the playful creatures lingered in their wake today. "Get ready, lass," the stringy-haired man yelled, knocking on Clara's cabin. Clara scrambled out of her cot where she'd been lying staring at the ceiling. What was going on? Had they arrived? She rushed upstairs and stared out into the dark, nighttime horizon, seeing an island reflected in the moonlight, along with smoke rising if one looked carefully. If there was smoke, there must be people. "Where are we?" she called back. "Tortuga Bay, of course," he said, like she was daft. The name struck fear and worry in her, the heart of the lawless pirate world. Her palms itched and her mouth went dry. What had she gotten herself into? Heart-pounding, she watched as the pirate enclave grew closer, suspecting madness would ensue when they arrived. But perhaps madness here was better than the cold, drab streets of Liverpool, where nothing but the gutter was ready to greet her. They sailed closer, then released the anchor. "Why have we stopped?" she asked as she reached the limping man who'd come to fetch her. "We have to row from here. They charge an arm and a leg to take the ship to port, and we got no cargo to unload. Besides, they're all pirates in there. You can't trust anyone." Clara bit her lip. That was not the assurance she needed to hear right now. But with dread and excitement she made her way down into the darkness by the rope ladder to the small boat waiting for passengers. It shifted uncomfortably when she stepped in, feeling conscious of her obvious lack of sea legs in a small boat like this. At least she hadn't embarrassed herself by spending the entire voyage leaning over the side, relieving the contents of her stomach. "Sit down, girl," one of the men said gruffly as she stumbled about, rocking the entire boat. Crouching down, she sat on an uncomfortable ledge, trying to keep her balance. 2 burly men rowed, 1 oar each, pulling the small boat to the shore in total silence, other than the sound of the oars splashing into the water. This was the first time these men had been silent as far as she could recall. Maybe even they were nervous coming here. Clara suppressed a sigh and bit the nail of her thumb as she waited. Before she was ready, the boat hit the beach to the left of the port, almost knocking her off the ledge. "You need to be carried?" one of the men asked, his face hidden in the shadows. "I'll manage," she said with a polite smile that she was sure was wasted in the darkness. She was not about to be carried ashore like a sack of potatoes, but maybe she was expected to be. She didn't know the rules, she realized as she jumped over the side of the boat, feeling the warm water running around her legs. Water soaked her heavy wool skirt, which grew heavier as she waded to shore. It was warm even at night. Sweat ran down her back, making her wool dress itch. The dress was ill-suited to the climate, which she had known for quite a while now, but she had nothing else other than her nightgown, which she only wore when alone in her cabin. The sand was soft under her feet, giving as she walked on it, following the men towards a jumble of buildings with faint lights shining through windows. At least they had buildings, she thought, but wasn't sure it was all that much of a comfort. The men all marched forward, and Clara followed, expecting they would take her to her father. This must be where he lived, or one of those ships in the harbor might be his, she thought, looking back at the ship silhouetted in the moonlight. Never in all her life would she have thought she'd end up here a month ago, when she was contemplating what to do with herself. "Come on, girl, why are you just standing there?" the stringy-haired man said. "Do you even have a name?" she asked, annoyed that he'd never bothered to give it to her. Manners were definitely not a practiced art amongst these men. "Tuber." "Tuber? That's an odd name." "I like potatoes." Clara blinked, guessing there was some logic behind the connection. She followed the man as he scuttled down the sand, reaching wooden steps leading up to the port jetty and boardwalk. They walked between buildings clustered without any sense, built on top of each other. There was hardly space for a horse down some of these side alleys, let alone a carriage. Apparently there were no carriages here, but then where would they go? There appeared to be no other habitation around. A donkey stood in the middle of the street, chewing on some grass. "Don't dawdle, girl. You might want to do this before everyone gets too drunk. Or maybe you wish to wait, enjoy the merriment." "No," Clara said emphatically. The sisters had warned her to no end of the evils that lay in drink, particularly to young virtuous girls. "Come then," he said, continuing farther down what looked like a poorly planned main street. The walkway was covered in wooden planks. Clara could hear shouting and laughing inside the buildings as they passed. Her guide was taking her to a building with a flaming lamp outside, which swung with a creak in the warm breeze. The shouting was louder inside, and Clara could hear a fiddle playing. Men sat in groups around tables playing cards and drinking. Women with indecently low-cut dresses served behind the bar and cleared the tables. Some sat playing cards as well, while a few were sitting in the laps of men, one having her breast fondled. Clara quickly looked away, flushing at the indecent sight. She stayed closer to Tuber as he continued walking into the large hall and toward a set of stairs. Everything was made of rough bare wood, and the place was full of rougher-looking men, all with piercing eyes leering at her. Noxious whiffs of unwashed human odor assaulted her intermittently, almost making her gag. She stumbled on the steps and scraped her knee, which she was sure bled underneath her dress. "Stay here," Tuber ordered, and kept walking into a doorway at the back. "Don't mind me," Clara complained to herself. "I'm only bleeding." Anger kept her nerves at bay, because she knew they would run wild if she didn't keep a tight rein on them. She clasped her hands together and turned around, looking out from the elevated platform she was standing on. Luckily, there were only a few people up here, sitting at tables in the corner, keeping their own company. A fight broke out below, and Clara watched as drunk men flailed at each other, while others laughed, and loud raucous music kept playing, until one of the fighters knocked the fiddler over, which seemed to really upset a few of the others. There were men of all ages here, burly men, thin men, but they all looked dirty, with unkempt long hair and worn clothes. This was what you got without the matrons of the world, Clara thought, or the influence of the church. Obviously she couldn't stay here. What life could she lead here? "This is her," a deep voice asked behind her, and Clara whipped around, facing an older man with dark hair. Silver lined his temples, although his hair was tied back into a knot. His face was handsome but weathered, and his eyes were hard. He wore a dark brown leather coat with exaggerated cuffs and gold buttons. Green eyes surveyed her, and he tilted his head to the side to consider her. This was her father. She knew instantly. He had the same green eyes as her. "Scrawny," he said, and stepped forward, walking around her, perusing her form. "Any gumption in her?" he asked, but addressed Tuber. "Some. We'll see how she does," he said dismissively, and waved her away. Clara's mouth fell open with the dismissal. This was not the reunion she had anticipated, being dismissed with a wave of his hand. "I have a name," she said. He paused and watched her for a while longer, his eyes piercing her. He had power here, carried himself like his word was law, expecting people to comply. "Don't we all?" he replied, and walked past her with large economical strides. Clara turned to stare at him, confounded that she'd sailed all this way to be dismissed by the man who was her father. Although the question of why he'd let her languish in a convent for the last 18 years was effectively solved.